from a tantrum-throwing Karen in a tie who schemed to derail my success, only to discover that revenge is a dish best served with receipts, to a Karen who learned the hard way that testing someone's patience can lead to instant payback. These are the tales of Karens who reached for control, only to be grounded by the weight of their own actions. But let's begin with one who made the mistake of underestimating a man in a wheelchair. What followed? Let's just say her empire didn't stand a chance. It was a biotech company, once thriving, its research pushing the boundaries of innovation. I had worked there as a biochemical engineer, part of a team that relied on precision, efficiency, and the technology that kept our operations running smoothly. The company's success was built on more than just research. It depended on specialized machines, intricate systems that had become the backbone of our daily work. And behind those machines, behind the patents and blueprints, was Henri. Henri was an old man, close to 70, confined to a wheelchair but still sharp as ever. He wasn't the most social person, but everyone respected him. He had been with the company for years, designing equipment that no other firm had, machines that made our research possible. His mind worked in ways that most of us couldn't comprehend. While others struggled with problems for weeks, Henri found solutions in hours. His designs weren't just functional, they were revolutionary. For years, the company had stable leadership under a CEO who understood the value of his employees. Then he retired, and Karen arrived. Karen wasn't just new, she was a force of chaos. From the moment she stepped into the building, she carried herself with an air of authority, as if she had something to prove. She wasn't interested in learning how things worked, she wanted to change them. She cut costs, rearranged departments, and introduced policies that disrupted the natural flow of work. She wasn't here to maintain success. She was here to dominate it. Within weeks, the company was in chaos. Then she set her sights on Henri, no one knew why. Maybe she saw him as a relic of the past, someone who didn't fit into her vision of a modern company. Maybe it was the way he ignored the storm she had created, quietly working, reviewing schematics, keeping to himself while everything else fell apart. The moment she called Henri into her office, we knew it wasn't going to end well. We all heard it. Karen didn't believe in closed-door discussions. Her voice carried through the office like a thunderclap. She accused Henri of being slow, of not keeping up with modern advancements, of sitting around doing nothing while others worked. She questioned his usefulness, his efficiency, his relevance. Henri, to his credit, remained calm. From my desk, I could barely make out his voice, steady, measured, no anger in his tone. But Karen's responses made it clear that she didn't like what she was hearing. That might have worked under the old CEO, but I run things differently, she snapped. I don't need an old man collecting a paycheck for doing nothing. Another pause. Then, the words that would destroy everything, "You're fired." Silence fell over the office. Henri didn't argue. He didn't beg. He didn't raise his voice. He simply left. We watched as he packed up his things, rolling past the rows of desks, past the machines he had built, past the people who owed their jobs to him. No one spoke. But we all knew this wasn't just another layoff. This was a mistake that would cost everything. At first, Karen continued as if nothing had happened. She strutted through the office, confident in her decision, convinced that Henri was nothing more than dead weight. She had no idea what she had just done. The first sign of trouble came when the machines failed, not all at once. Just a few systems at first, small glitches, minor shutdowns. The engineers tried to fix them, but nothing worked. Then more systems failed. Then more, soon, entire projects ground to a halt. Panic spread through the company. People whispered about Henri's departure, about the patents, about who really owned the machines. And then the truth surfaced. Henri's patents did not belong to the company. The company had never owned them. Henri had leased them under strict conditions. His technology could be used only while he remained employed. The moment he left, the rights expired. Karen had fired the only man who could keep the company running. She tried to fight it. She demanded that the machines be restarted. She ordered engineers to bypass the restrictions. It was impossible. And then came the news that sealed her fate. Henri had moved on. The competition had hired him immediately. They had been waiting for this opportunity for years. Now they had his patents, his knowledge, his systems. While we struggled, they advanced. Karen, for all her arrogance, had no way to fix it. She tried to bring Henri back. She sent offers, salary increases, promises. Henri ignored them all. And then came the lawsuit. Henri had not just been fired, he had been humiliated. The entire office had heard Karen insult him for his age and disability. It was illegal, and Henri knew it. The lawsuit hit hard. Legal fees piled up. Investors pulled out. The company bled money. Then the board of directors stepped in. Karen was forced into damage control, But it was too late. She had been CEO for 3 months. 3 months, and now she was gone. The company never recovered. Once a biotech leader, it now teetered on the edge of collapse. The halls that had once buzzed with innovation were silent. The machines Henri had built sat untouched, useless, waiting for a resurgence that would never come. Across the city, Henri worked in peace, his patents now pushing a different company to new heights. He never looked back, but we did. And every time we passed the empty building, we remembered. One decision, one mistake, the fall of a company. It's difficult to rebuild after such a collapse, especially when it all traced back to just one person. Just one. But if that seemed harsh, what came next was even harsher. In the next story, Karen Barbara learned that patience in marriage is never promised, and testing its limits can bring consequences faster than expected. It was early morning when I woke up, the clock reading 6 o'clock a.m. sharp. I had packed everything the night before, double-checking that we had our boarding passes, ID, and luggage ready to go. The flight wasn't until 10 o'clock a.m., but I wasn't about to take any chances this time. I wasn't going to let what happened last year repeat itself. So what happened last year, you may ask? Well, as usual, Barbara, my wife, was still in bed, buried beneath the blankets. I called her name, nudging her shoulder. No response. I tried again. Nothing. I sighed, knowing exactly how this was going to go. After 5 attempts, she finally stirred, groaning about how early it was. We need to leave by 8 o'clock, I reminded her, pulling the curtains open to let in the morning light. Barbara didn't move. Instead, she mumbled something about needing coffee first. 30 minutes passed, and she was still in her pajamas, casually pouring herself a bowl of cereal. I checked my watch, 7:45 a.m. We should be getting in the car, not starting breakfast, I said, keeping my voice steady. Barbara rolled her eyes. Relax, we have plenty of time. By the time we finally pulled out of the driveway, it was 9 o'clock a.m., an hour later than planned. I gripped the steering wheel, already bracing for what I knew was coming. The airport was a madhouse. Families hauling oversized suitcases, security lines snaking through the terminal, impatient travelers checking their watches. We didn't make it. The airline refused to refund our tickets, and the next available flight wasn't until the following day. That was the first time we missed a flight to see my daughter, Jess. She was in her junior year of college on the East Coast, while my wife, Barbara, and I lived in the Pacific Northwest. Every semester, we visited for Parents' Weekend and Move-In Day, and she came home for the holidays. This trip was supposed to be a short but important visit, just a weekend to spend time with her before the semester got too busy. But thanks to Barbara, we lost half of it. Jess was disappointed, though she didn't say much. She didn't have to. The look on her face when I called to tell her we wouldn't be there until tomorrow was enough. Now, months later, we were making another trip, this time to help Jess move into her new apartment. I made sure to be even more prepared. I told Barbara we'd leave extra early, no exceptions. She huffed and rolled her eyes but followed along this time. We got to the airport with time to spare, and she spent the next 45 minutes complaining about how early we were. I ignored it. The first flight went smoothly, landing us in our connecting city, a massive airport with rails, escalators, and crowds of travelers moving in every direction. Our layover was just an hour. We got off the plane at 9:15 a.m., and the next one started boarding at 9:40 a.m. No room for error. That's when Barbara said she wanted Starbucks. There's coffee right there, I said, pointing to a small market near our gate. No, I want Starbucks. I knew exactly where it was across the airport, past the rail, a good walk away. We don't have time, I said. I'll be quick, she shot back. I should have stopped her, but I knew it wouldn't work. She was already walking away. I watched the minutes tick by. 9:30, 9:35, 9:40. Still no Barbara. The gate agent started calling boarding groups. I dialed her phone. No answer. I called again. Nothing. By the time they called our group, I was pacing by the gate. I called again, this time 3 times in a row. Finally, she picked up. I'm coming, she said casually. The line was long. They're almost done boarding, I told her. I'm literally on my way. I waited at the gate, my eyes locked on the hallway, expecting to see her rushing toward me at any moment. The gate agent gave me a 2-minute warning. I pleaded. She's coming, just a few more minutes. The attendant shook her head. We have to close the gate. I had a choice, stay behind with her or board the plane. I boarded. A few minutes later my phone rang. Barbara's voice was sharp. They won't let me on. The flight's closed, I said simply. You need to get off the plane. No, I told her. We're not doing this again to Jess. You can buy a new ticket for the next flight. She didn't respond. By the time I landed, Jess was already texting me, asking if Mom was with me. I explained what happened. She didn't seem surprised. Barbara arrived later that day. She acted like nothing had happened, brushing off the missed flight as if it was just another inconvenience. I thought maybe this time she realized she was at fault. I was wrong. Back home, she gave me the cold shoulder. A full week passed in silence. No conversations, no acknowledgement, just an icy wall between us. When she finally spoke, it wasn't to make peace. It was to let me know, in no uncertain terms, that she saw me as the villain in all of this. But was I? Honestly, I had everything planned, every detail accounted for. Was I really the one at fault here, or was I missing something? What do you think? Let me know in the comments as we move forward. Back to Barbara, I laid out the facts. You made us miss a flight last year, and we had to waste money on new tickets. This time I warned you and you still left. I can't keep doing this. Her arms were crossed, her face blank. So what, you're just going to leave me behind every time now? If that's what it takes, I said. The conversation didn't go any further, but it got me thinking. I went back over everything, the missed flights, the attitude, the way she always seemed indifferent about seeing Jess. And then I thought about something Jess had said once. She doesn't even want to come. I dismissed it at the time, but now I wasn't so sure. Jess wasn't Barbara's daughter. I had been married before, and my wife had passed away during childbirth. I remarried when Jess was 6. Barbara had always wanted children of her own, but it never happened. Maybe that was part of it. I remembered little comments she'd made over the years. How excited she was for an empty nest. How she always insisted on coming to Jess's school but never seemed thrilled to actually be there. Was she doing this on purpose? I didn't bring it up. Instead, I proposed a new plan. From now on, you'll book your flights and I'll book mine. You want to take your time? Fine. But I won't be waiting. If you miss a flight, that's on you. She wasn't happy, but she agreed. Then I went a step further. I'll also be going to Father's weekend alone. Jess wants that time with me. Barbara didn't argue. Jess, on the other hand, was thrilled. And just like that, things were set. Barbara and I would still go together for Parents' Weekend, but for the first time, I'd have a trip with just Jess. No delays, no missed flights. No distractions. It was strange, realizing how much I had overlooked over the years. Maybe Barbara truly had no resentment toward Jess. Maybe she just had bad time management. Or maybe, just maybe, this was her way of keeping her distance. I didn't have an answer. But the next time I went to see my daughter, I'd be getting on that plane. Whether Barbara was with me or not, I made that decision to keep the peace. But disruptions weren't confined to my marriage. They followed me to work too. Chad, my coworker, had always been the one throwing tantrums. But what he didn't realize was that this time, I had something waiting for him. And the sauce I was cooking was spicier than anything he had ever tasted. There's something particularly grating about a grown man acting like a toddler. Imagine the tantrums, the self-centeredness, the inability to accept the simplest responsibility. And now imagine all that bottled up in the form of my coworker, Chad. Yes, Chad. The guy who claimed every small victory as if it were a Nobel Prize and blamed every mishap on anyone but himself. I'd been working at the company for 3 years when Chad was hired. At first, I thought, give the guy a chance. Maybe he's just adjusting. But it didn't take long before I realized Chad wasn't adjusting. He was the problem. It started with the coffee machine. Chad decided that since he didn't drink coffee, he didn't need to clean up after himself in the break room. He'd leave crumbs, wrappers, and half-empty soda cans everywhere. The rest of us cleaned up after him, until one day, Karen, our department manager, called me into her office. I need to talk to you about your behavior in the break room, she said, her tone stern. My behavior? I blinked, genuinely confused. Yes, Chad informed me that you've been leaving a mess. My jaw dropped. Chad said I've been leaving a mess. Karen, I clean that break room almost every day because he refuses to pick up after himself. Karen waved her hand dismissively. Let's keep this professional. Just make sure it doesn't happen again. I walked out of her office fuming. Chad had thrown me under the bus and Karen, ever the peacemaker, had taken his side without a second thought. It didn't stop there. Chad's antics escalated. He'd accidentally forward my emails with sensitive project details to the wrong clients, then claim I hadn't been clear in my instructions. He'd book conference rooms for meetings he didn't have, leaving my team scrambling to find space. And when Karen finally noticed our plummeting productivity, Chad was the first to pipe up with, I think we just need to work harder. But the final straw came when Chad sabotaged a major presentation. It was a pitch for a big client, one that could land us a contract worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'd spent weeks preparing, triple-checking every detail, and rehearsing until I could recite the pitch in my sleep. The night before the presentation, Chad borrowed my laptop to check something real quick. I should have known better. The next morning, as I stood in front of the client, I opened my file only to find a mess. Slides were missing, data was wrong, and the video demonstration I'd prepared had been replaced with some irrelevant clip of puppies playing in a field. My face burned as I stumbled through the presentation, trying to salvage what I could. By the time I was done, the client looked unimpressed, and Karen, who had been sitting in the back of the room, looked livid. "Explain yourself," she demanded the moment we were alone. "It wasn't me," I said through gritted teeth. "Someone tampered with my laptop." Karen crossed her arms. "That's a serious accusation. Who would do such a thing?" I didn't even hesitate. "Chad." But of course Chad denied everything, and Karen, in her infinite wisdom, decided that since there was no proof, we'd move on and focus on the future. Fine, I thought. If Chad wanted to play dirty, I could play dirty too. The first step in my plan was subtle. Chad was a creature of habit, and one of those habits was leaving his desk unlocked when he went to lunch. I wasn't about to do anything illegal or irreversible, but I did have a bit of fun. I swapped his screensaver for an image of a baby throwing a tantrum. When he returned from lunch and saw it, he threw a fit. Not because he didn't like it, but because he couldn't figure out how to change it back. He ended up calling IT, who, much to my delight, spent 20 minutes explaining basic computer functions to him in front of the entire office. Next, I targeted his coffee nemesis status. I started bringing in donuts for the team every Friday, but I made sure to leave a little sign on the box that read, "For clean break room users only." Chad's face turned beet red the first time he saw it, but he didn't dare take one. He just sulked at his desk, glaring at anyone who dared to enjoy a donut, but the piece de resistance came when I discovered his Achilles heel, his fear of public speaking. Chad loved to act like he was the star of the show, but the moment he was put in the spotlight, he'd freeze like a deer in headlights. I volunteered him to give a presentation at the company's quarterly meeting. "Chad's been working really hard on this," I told Karen with a smile. "He deserves the recognition." Chad tried to weasel his way out of it, but Karen insisted. After all, she couldn't say no to such a glowing recommendation. The day of the meeting, Chad stood at the front of the room, trembling like a leaf. His slides were a mess, because, of course, he'd thrown them together at the last minute, and his stammering explanations only made things worse. By the time he was done, the entire room was stifling laughter, and Karen looked like she regretted ever hiring him. I should have felt satisfied, but something about the whole ordeal left a bitter taste in my mouth. Revenge had been sweet, sure, but it hadn't fixed anything. Chad was still Chad, and Karen was still Karen. If anything, the office felt even more toxic than before. That's when I realized it was time to change tactics. Instead of undermining Chad, I started documenting everything. Every time he blamed me for something, I kept a record of what really happened. Every time he sabotaged a project or threw a tantrum, I made a note. I even managed to snap a photo of the mess he left in the break room one day, a mess he later tried to blame on me. It took weeks, but eventually, I had a mountain of evidence. I compiled it all into a neat little report and sent it to HR. To my surprise, they actually took it seriously. Within days, Karen was called into a meeting with HR, followed by Chad. I didn't know what was said, but the change was immediate. Karen started paying closer attention to what was going on in the office, and Chad learned his lesson. He still worked at the company, but he'd been demoted to a position with little responsibility. He stopped blaming others for his mistakes, stopped leaving messes for others to clean up, and even started showing up on time for meetings, and me. I kept my head down and focused on my work. Revenge had been fun, but justice, real, undeniable justice, was even better. Thank you for diving into this tale of Karens and their hard-earned lessons. Some people never learn, but for the rest of us, these stories remind us of the consequences of pushing the wrong buttons. Stick around for more dramatic encounters, shocking twists, and unforgettable moments. After all, every story has a side you've yet to see.